At first glance, it might just look like a massive construction site, but what you're actually looking at is China building its first major canal in 1,000 years through some of the most rugged terrain in southern China.
There is a construction site in southern China right now where thousands of workers are carving a path through solid rock, moving earth equal to Three Gorges Dams.
In China, everything seems to be bigger, the largest and most powerful dam in the world. It even slows down the Earth's rotation. The sheer scale of this structure is anything the world has ever seen before. The Three Gorges Dam.
And building something the country has not attempted in over 700 years. It is a canal that connects a landlocked industrial empire straight to the sea. And when the water starts flowing later this year, the entire logistics map of Asia changes with it. The project racing toward its finish line. Right now, as you watch this, the Pingloo Canal is weeks away from completion. The governor of Guangxi Province, Wei Tao, recently issued a directive that caught the attention of every shipping analyst in Asia. The canal, originally scheduled to open in December of 2026, is now being pushed to open in September of the same year. That timing is not random. It lines up exactly with the China ASEAN Expo, an event where Beijing plans to showcase what it can do to every trade partner in Southeast Asia. As of February of this year, about 91% of the total investment has already been spent. All three of the massive lock complexes that lift ships up and down the waterway have finished their main concrete pours. Excavation is sitting at roughly 97% complete. The total price tag works out to around $10.3 billion, financed through a state-owned company called Pingloo Canal Group, with backing from provincial investment arms and the China Communications Construction Company, one of the largest infrastructure conglomerates on the planet. The waterway stretches 134.2 kilometers from a reservoir near Hangzhou City all the way to the Xinjiang River, which then feeds into the Beibu Gulf. Out of that entire length, only about 6.5 kilometers is freshly cut land. The rest widens and deepens rivers that already existed, which is how the engineering team managed to compress what would normally be a decade-long project into roughly 4 years. To give you a sense of how rapidly this is all coming together, the investment tracker numbers are genuinely hard to believe. In mid-2024, the project had spent around 34 billion yuan. By the start of 2025, that figure had climbed to 49 billion. By September of the same year, it had reached nearly 60 billion, which represented about 81% of the total budget. By January of this year, almost all of the lock structures were fully poured, and by February, the spending curve had passed the 90% mark. This is a construction pace that would be considered aggressive even for a building the size of an office tower. And Pingloo is a 134-kilometer canal cut through mountain terrain. The speed of this build is not a coincidence. It is a message. And that message becomes clear once you understand why this canal exists at all. The hidden geography problem that started everything. Most people outside of China have no idea how locked in the interior of the country actually is. The western and southern provinces produce a staggering amount of the country's industrial output. Sichuan alone runs thousands of factories. Guizhou is one of the biggest coal and aluminum producers in the nation. Yunnan sends out chemicals, metals, and agricultural goods by the ton every single day. All of that production has to reach an ocean before it can be sold to the rest of the world. The problem is that some of these regions sit more than 1,000 kilometers from the nearest major port. Before the Pingloo Canal, freight from a steel plant in Guizhou had two bad options. It could travel east by truck and rail through Guangdong Province to reach Guangzhou or Shenzhen, or it could float down the Xinjiang River system and still end up going through Guangdong anyway. Either way, Guangxi Province, the region that sits between the interior and the sea, was just a pass-through zone. The wealth generated by all that freight flowed to someone else's ports. A manufacturer in Sichuan, producing world-class steel at a competitive price, would watch profits get eaten alive by the cost of moving that steel 1,000 kilometers before it even touched saltwater. That meant every factory in the western interior was paying a quiet tax for decades, not to the government, but to geography itself. What makes this situation even more striking is that this problem has been recognized for over a century. Sun Yat-sen, the founding father of modern China, sketched out a version of this exact canal route in his two-volume National Development Plan published between 1919 and 1921. He identified Qinzhou as a future second-tier port and argued that linking it to the Zhejiang system would be a foundational step in opening up the south. The Chinese government has considered versions of the project at various points across the 1950s, the 1980s, and again in the early 2000s. Each time it was shelved because of cost, concerns from Guangdong about water flow, and the sheer technical challenge of cutting through the watershed. That is the problem Beijing finally decided to solve with water. The engineering that should not be possible. The land between the starting reservoir and the sea is anything but flat. There are hills, ridges, and a full mountain watershed in the way. To move a 5,000-ton cargo ship across terrain like that, you need something called a lock, which works like a giant elevator for boats. A ship sails into a water-filled chamber. The gates close, water is added or drained to match the level on the other side, and then the far gates open to let the vessel continue. It sounds simple until you try to build one at this scale. The Pingloo Canal has 3 lock complexes. Their names are Madao, Qishi, and Qingnian. Each complex has 2 parallel locks running side by side, and each individual lock chamber measures 300 meters long by 34 meters wide. That is larger than most of the lock chambers on the Panama Canal's original alignment. The Madao complex alone handles a lift of about 30 meters, which is roughly the height of a 10-story building. Every single ship that passes through has to be raised or lowered that entire distance. Here is where the engineering gets remarkable. Cheng Yaofei, the chairman of Guangxi Pingloo Canal Construction Company and the man serving as chief construction commander on the project, has said that filling one of these locks takes only 16 minutes and recycles 63% of the water that would normally be lost. According to reporting from CGTN in June of last year, the Madao Lock is the largest inland water-saving ship lock on Earth. That water recycling is not a luxury feature. It is the only reason the canal works at all. The region sees dry seasons where local communities rely on the same water sources, and a traditional lock system would drain those sources dry. The design of the water-saving system is itself an achievement worth understanding. Madao uses a 3-stage water-saving basin arrangement where water from an emptying lock is captured in successive holding chambers and fed back into the next fill cycle. Qingnian uses a different concept called mutual fill and drain, where 2 parallel lock chambers feed water into each other as one rises and one falls. The valve opening and closing speeds on these locks are reportedly 2 to 4 times faster than the international benchmark, based on more than 1,000 hydraulic experiments conducted by Wuhan University of Technology and the Nanjing Hydraulic Research Institute. This is not retrofit technology. It is engineering developed specifically for this canal. Now, look at the earthwork. This is where your understanding needs correcting if you have read coverage of the project in Western media. The total volume of earth and rock being moved is 339 million cubic meters. That is nearly 3 times the excavation volume of the Three Gorges Dam. 12.9 million cubic meters of concrete are being poured across the project, and the concrete has been engineered to last at least 130 years, which exceeds the design life of the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge by a full decade. One slope at the Madao site, called Slope Number 2, rises 188 meters high. That makes it the tallest channel slope under construction anywhere in China, roughly the height of a 70-story skyscraper. There is also a 480-meter fishway built into the Qingnian Lock, including a dedicated eel ladder that restores a migration route that had been blocked on the Xinjiang River for more than 60 years. A full digital twin system called Pingloo Cloud tracks every vessel, every water level, and every structural reading in real time, making this the first fully digitally integrated canal in Chinese history. 27 new bridges are being built or reconstructed across the route, and as of the start of this year, about 19 of them were already finished. At peak construction, roughly 20,000 workers were on site simultaneously, alongside more than 6,000 pieces of heavy equipment. Some of the largest cutter suction dredgers in Asia have been deployed to the estuary section, including a vessel known informally as the Tianjinghao, which is one of the most powerful dredging machines ever built by Chinese engineers. The construction side of the story is impressive. The consequences of what gets unlocked when the water starts flowing is where things get interesting. The revenge of the interior. For decades, China's economic miracle was a coastal story. Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Tianjin. These were the names that mattered. The further you went inland, the further you fell behind. President Xi Jinping's policy framework of common prosperity, which he described in April of 2023 in Guangdong as the essence of Chinese modernization, is meant to reverse that imbalance. The Pingloo Canal is what common prosperity looks like when you pour it in concrete. During an inspection trip to Guangxi in December of 2023, President Xi stated that the future development of Guangxi hinges upon its river-sea intermodal connectivity, namely the Pingloo Canal. Then in April of the following year, during a visit to Chongqing, he expanded that vision. He said, "The country must ensure the successful construction and operation of this landmark project to drive high-level opening up in the western and inland regions and create a hub of interconnected networks." Translated out of official language, that means the inland provinces are no longer going to be treated as the country's backyard. They are going to get their own coast by force of engineering. The numbers back up the intent. Once the canal opens, cargo from inland Guangxi will travel about 560 kilometers less to reach the ocean compared to the current route through Guangdong. A journey from the interior to an ASEAN port will drop from roughly 30 days down to somewhere between 7 and 10 days. Annual freight savings are projected at about $725 million every year, according to research cited by the South China Morning Post and multiple analyst reports. For context, that is the annual logistics equivalent of giving every manufacturer in the southwestern interior a permanent compounding tax break. Entire cities are being rebuilt around the canal before it even opens. Nanning, the capital of Guangxi, is already constructing industrial parks along the projected route. The electric vehicle giant BYD is building a lithium carbonate plant with a 30,000-ton annual capacity right next to the waterway. Sun Paper, one of China's largest pulp and paper manufacturers, is investing around 20 billion yuan into an industrial park on the same corridor. This is captive cargo, meaning factories that will be producing goods specifically to move through the canal from day one. The logistics experts, who raised white elephant concerns in the early planning stages, are watching those concerns evaporate in real time. Qinzhou, which sits at the canal's exit point into the Beibu Gulf, is being transformed even more dramatically. The city used to be a second-tier regional port that most people outside China had never heard of. It is now being expanded into one of the most automated container terminals in the country, with deep water berths being upgraded to handle vessels far larger than anything the canal itself will carry. Fangchenggang and Beihai, the two other major ports on the Beibu Gulf, are adding terminals and warehousing specifically designed for goods that will be funneling in from the interior. Beibu Gulf Port as a whole handled more than 10 million containers last year, and projections for the next decade have it approaching the scale of mid-tier Chinese coastal ports. Lei Xiaohua, a research fellow on Southeast Asia at the Guangxi Academy of Social Sciences, explained the logic to China Daily. He said the project demonstrated the nation's resolve to accelerate the opening up of the western region, including attracting more domestic and foreign investment. He added that it will lure more foreign businesses to invest in the western region and expedite its growth and opening up. There is also a jobs story here that deserves attention. Post-opening projections from the Guangxi Beibu Gulf International Port Group estimate that roughly 120,000 permanent jobs will be created across 3 canal economic zones once the waterway is operational. During construction itself, a program called Work for Relief has employed more than 1,800 local farmers and returned migrant workers directly on the project, giving rural communities along the route a stake in the canal's success beyond just compensation payments. There comes the part where a lot of coverage about this project gets the story wrong. The quiet geopolitical shift nobody is talking about. A number of analysts have tried to frame the Pingloo Canal as China's answer to the Strait of Malacca dilemma, which is the long-standing worry in Beijing that roughly 80% of imported Chinese crude oil passes through a narrow strait that could be blockaded in a crisis. That framing is incorrect. Ships exiting the Pingloo Canal still have to sail through the Beibu Gulf, around Hainan Island, and through the South China Sea to reach Malacca. The canal does not solve that problem at all. What the canal actually does is compress distance inside China itself. It gives the country redundancy. Right now, if anything disrupts the major eastern ports, the entire economy takes a hit. A storm, a labor dispute, unexpected geopolitical friction, and the shockwaves ripple through every supply chain in the country. Pingloo creates a southern alternative, an independent lane that does not depend on Guangdong or the Yangtze at all. The new International Land-Sea Trade Corridor, which is the official framework Pingloo slots into, already connects 18 provinces in China to 393 ports in 119 countries. The canal is projected to raise the capacity of that corridor by around 40%. Vietnam, which handles most of the overland traffic between China and Southeast Asia, has been cautiously quiet about all of this. The country recently agreed to adopt the Chinese Standard Rail Gauge, which is a technical concession that makes sense only if you expect Pingloo-era connectivity to change the shape of regional trade for decades. And here is the detail almost no Western analyst is discussing yet. The Pingloo Canal is a prototype. Chinese planners are already in early feasibility work on a second canal called the Shangui Canal, which would extend northward for roughly 300 kilometers to connect the Yangtze River basin directly to the Beibu Gulf.
In China, only some parts of the Yangtze River can handle huge ships as such. The designers of Pingloo Canal have clearly envisioned and planned for the busy shipping traffic in the future.
Estimated cost is around $21 billion. It is being discussed for inclusion in the 15th five-year plan, which covers the period from 2026 to 2030. According to an investigation published by Caixin in December of 2024, there are at least 5 major canal projects in planning or early construction in China, with a combined budget of roughly 850 billion yuan. Caixin calls the phenomenon canal fever. Pingloo is the proof of concept. If it opens on schedule and runs the way the planners promise, the next one gets approved. That is the story behind the story. Meanwhile, the other big canal dreams around the region are falling apart. The Kra Canal idea in Thailand has been discussed for 300 years and is no closer to being built now than it was in the 17th century. Ian Story, a senior fellow at the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore, pointed out that the Kra idea resurfaces every time the Thai economy hits a rough patch and then quietly disappears again when political attention moves on. Nicaragua formally canceled its cross-ocean canal concession in May of 2024, after the Chinese-backed company behind it lost the majority of its financing. The Panama Canal itself is dealing with drought-driven water level problems that forced it to reduce vessel traffic last year. Pingloo is the only major new canal in Asia actually being delivered on time, and the engineering teams perfecting its lock technology are the same ones now at work on Cambodia's Funan Techo Canal, which President Xi personally witnessed the signing of in April of 2025. What you are watching is not just a Chinese infrastructure project. It is the early export of a canal engineering standard that Chinese companies plan to sell across Southeast Asia over the next decade. A project this size always carries a human and environmental bill, and Pingloo is no exception. The costs hidden behind the concrete. About 10,000 people across the canal's route have been relocated, according to reporting by Caixin. In Lingshan County, which is the most affected area, 3 towns and 24 villages saw land acquired for the project. Roughly 14,000 mu of farmland which works out to about 956 hectares, was taken. 1,424 households, totaling 6,314 people, were moved to new locations. 3,370 grave sites had to be relocated. Every single one of those numbers represents a family making a decision they did not get to fully choose. The resettlement process officially delivered 21 new housing sites, some with schools, hospitals, and markets. State media has highlighted success stories, including the transplanting of a 217-year-old tree rather than cutting it down. But the more complete picture is harder to find. The Straits Times reported specific grievances from villagers in one affected area, describing groundwater diversion issues and homes coated in construction dust. Those voices are noticeably absent from most of the state, reporting you will find online. The environmental side is where the project gets genuinely the second largest. The canal cuts through mangrove wetlands in the Maui Sea Reserve, which is the second largest mangrove reserve in China. The official environmental assessment documents that 13.87 hectares of mangrove were directly occupied, containing around 255,000 individual mangrove plants. Builders claim that 10,000 mature trees were transplanted and 275,000 new saplings were planted. Whether the ecosystem actually survives that kind of reconstruction is something biologists will only be able to answer years from now. The bigger concern is the Chinese white dolphin. A population of around 300 to 450 of these dolphins lives in Sanyang Bay, which sits right next to the canal's exit into the sea. A peer-reviewed study published by researchers at the Chinese Academy of Sciences in 2022 documented a roughly 33% decline in this population between 2015 and 2019. That decline was recorded before canal construction even began. Adding 89 million tons of annual cargo traffic and 5,000-ton vessels to that environment is not a neutral event. Professor Pan Wenxi of Peking University, who founded the research base studying these dolphins, described them as a flagship species in the ocean and said that protecting them effectively protects tens of thousands of other creatures in the area. A study published in January of this year by researchers from Guangxi University and Boston College found that wildlife habitat along the canal route dropped by around 516 square kilometers during peak construction. Migration corridors for animal populations fell by roughly 20%. Masked palm civet habitat declined by almost a quarter. These are not numbers that disappear once the canal is done. Biodiversity indicators in the broader region dropped by a quarter during the peak construction window in 2022, and researchers are watching closely to see whether those indicators recover once the heaviest earthwork is complete. Water is another concern. The canal will divert between 24 and 40 cubic meters of water per second from existing river systems, which has downstream implications for the Pearl River Delta and for saltwater intrusion in Guangdong during dry seasons. Guangdong actually opposed the project for decades for exactly this reason. The environmental impact assessment was approved in June of 2022, just 23 days after it was submitted by the same provincial government that owns the canal company. No independent review from outside conservation groups was part of that process, and major international environmental organizations like WWF and Mongabay have not published dedicated investigations of the canal, which is a notable absence for a project of this size. There is a historical precedent worth mentioning here. The Yangtze River baiji, a freshwater dolphin unique to China, was declared functionally extinct in 2007 after decades of shipping traffic, dam construction, and pollution along the river.
The baiji was one of the world's few true river dolphin species. Witnessing the extinction of a unique species is a really devastating experience to go through.
The pattern is familiar. A major waterway gets industrialized, a charismatic species that was already under pressure collapses, and by the time the decline becomes undeniable, it is too late to reverse. Whether the Sanyang Bay dolphins end up on the same trajectory is a question nobody wants to answer out loud, but every biologist studying the region is quietly asking it. What this actually means for the rest of the world. Step back from the details, and the Pingloo Canal is a statement about how China approaches problems that other countries would consider unsolvable. A region is cut off from the sea by geography. Most governments would respond by building more trucks, more rail, more roads. China looked at the same problem and decided to move the sea. The design capacity for the canal is 89 million tons per year of one-way cargo at opening, with projections reaching 95 million tons by 2035 and around 150 million tons by 2050. To put that in scale, the Panama Canal's first full decade of operation moved around 50 million tons in total across 10 years. Pingloo is being designed to exceed that entire decade in under a year. There is a lesson here for every country watching. India has massive industrial zones in its interior with coastal access problems that look almost identical to what Guangxi faced. Brazil has industrial and agricultural output in regions hundreds of kilometers from its coastline. Central African nations and parts of South America share versions of the same issue. For all of them, Pingloo is more than a Chinese infrastructure project. It is a demonstration that the constraints of geography are negotiable if a government is willing to commit the money, the engineering, and the political will at the same time. The reason so few countries actually attempt projects at this scale is not technical. The engineering is well understood. The reason is political. Building something this large requires a long planning horizon, coordinated central funding, environmental shortcuts that many democratic societies would not tolerate, and the ability to relocate thousands of people without letting the process stall for years in court. China can make those trade-offs. Whether the rest of the world should copy the model is an entirely separate question. Consider the contrast with infrastructure projects in comparable countries. California has been trying to build a high-speed rail line for more than 15 years, with costs that have tripled and a completion date that keeps sliding further into the future. The United Kingdom has spent decades debating a third runway at Heathrow Airport. Germany took more than a decade to open a single new airport in Berlin. None of these projects involve moving mountains. None of them involve redirecting rivers. And yet they struggle in ways that Pingloo simply has not, because the political systems around them require consensus that a project in rural Guangxi never had to build. This is not an argument that China's model is better. It is an argument that the Pingloo Canal, more than almost any other project being built anywhere in the world today, shows what happens when a country decides to pursue infrastructure the way it used to be pursued 100 years ago, when governments in the United States and Europe were building their own grand canals, railways, and hydroelectric systems without worrying about modern planning procedures. The world has moved on from that era in most places. China has not. When the Pingloo Canal opens later this year, the first cargo ships will not look dramatic. They will look like ordinary container vessels moving through an ordinary waterway. But every one of those ships will be carrying a quiet signal. The signal is that the interior of China is now connected to the ocean, that the inland provinces are about to get their turn at coastal prosperity, that a second canal is probably coming right behind this one, and that the map of Asian trade is being redrawn without most of the world noticing. Factories that used to be stranded are about to become exporters. Cities that were considered second tier are about to become logistics hubs. A region that was quietly paying a geographic tax for generations is about to stop paying it. And somewhere in Beijing, a set of engineers and planners is already sketching out what the next one should look like. That is the full picture of the canal that is about to change Southern Asia. Drop a comment and tell me if you think the rest of the world should be paying more attention to projects like this, or if the costs are too high to be worth copying.